In a future where there's no war in exchange for the loss of human emotion and individuality, one man breaks from the delusion and feels within an unfeeling world. Will he ever be able to break the shackles holding humanity back from its fullness? Or will the ones who keep the peace resort to unpeaceful options, suppressing what makes humans human? Hello, and welcome to our channel. Today we'll recap and review an American sci-fi action film called Equilibrium. Let's check it out. World War III is over and done with, and as a result, the population on the planet has greatly reduced, and the world has decided that it never wants to go the route of war ever again. So what do? They form a state called Libria and decide to get to the root cause of all wars. They believe that emotions are responsible for war. Irrespective of the particular emotion displayed, it might be responsible for wars. If you laugh at a very funny joke that every person should laugh at, it might annoy another, and somewhere in the whole mix, a war might just erupt. So it becomes clear that emotions are responsible for wars. This is what the Governing Council of Libria teaches its citizens. To further enforce this twisted ideology, the council creates a strict law enforcement cleric order composed of elite men skilled in armed and unarmed combat. Among them is Preston, cold, apathetic, and ruthless as any Librian ought to be, and his partner, Partridge, who's a bit more soft-hearted than most would expect from an enforcement cleric. They are both sent on a joint mission to raid the outskirts of the city-state called Nether, where sense-offending resistance resides. A mighty demonstration of the cleric's skills does nothing but prove Preston's flawless handling of acrobatics and gunmanship, wiping off with ease any sense offender in sight. Although there are a few questions that beg to be answered, like why were the bullets from the resistance scared to fly towards Preston? Or why did the resistance all miss a target that was literally right in front of them? Well, what do we know about compliant bullets anyways? With the resistance taken care of, their true motives for ambushing the rebels are revealed when Preston and his crew locate a stash of items and collectibles, ranging from art, music, literature, and the like, secretly hidden from their impending destruction. These items are, by Librian law, emotional content, objects that can induce emotion within recipients, thus making them hazardous for any Librian who gets their hands on them. Preston orders the items to be incinerated without a trace and makes his leave with his partner. The cold, emotionless approach of Preston and the enforcement team might not appear relatable to a lot of viewers. They may all assume that it's just good acting on display. However, how often have people blindly followed specific affiliations or interests without asking any questions? While they exit the resistance premises, Partridge got an item that didn't get burned with the rest. Hiding within his pocket is a book of poems by renowned poet W.B. Yeats, but he insists that the only reason he took it was to turn it in himself. The next scene shows the leader of the city, Father, who encourages the people to take their emotion-suppressing drug, Prosium, to ensure that no one gets emotional enough to cause trouble. The populace is excited by the statement of Father and they clap cheerfully. Hey now, were these guys supposed to clap so enthusiastically? Aren't emotions responsible for enthusiasm? Preston goes to his supervisor, the vice consul, DuPont, after the raid. He questions Preston about his background rather than what took place at his latest task, revealing that he's a family man of 2 children, but also a widower after losing his beloved wife Viviana to sense offense 4 years ago. The vice consul insists if he felt anything with such tragedy, only for Preston to deny any semblance of emotion regarding his deceased wife. Yet DuPont suspects him anyway and warns him to be careful next time. Preston, on the other hand, is no fool to his partner's scheme. He later finds out after the raid that his partner had intentionally refrained from dosing on Prosium, the drug that keeps all Librians from feeling emotions. For this, he understood his colleague's earlier conduct with the book not being sent to be processed and decides to respond to Partridge's lawlessness. He confronts him at the Nether, where he routinely visits for supposed inspections. The cleric points his gun to his offending partner, who also slowly draws out a gun, knowing what fate awaits him. Preston shoots him through the book in his hands. Immediately after the incident, a replacement cleric for Partridge arrives to pick up Preston from the crime scene. Brandt assesses the situation by making sure that no further sense offenders leave the area while sending his condolences to the man. He also states that his newfound partnership with Preston will advance his career, while also telling him that he can tell what one feels before they know it, suggesting his suspicions of him just on their first interaction alone. Preston's other relationships are also as indifferent as anyone else's. Arriving home, his own son Robbie calls him by his first name instead of the regular words like dad or father, making his own connection with his son heartless and empty besides the continuation of his bloodline. He is also preparing his son to become a top cleric like himself, as he watches the man who dictates Libria's mission on their TV screen. As he lies down in bed, he begins to remember Partridge's last words before having dreams of Viviana, or rather, memories, as he imagines what took place 4 years ago. His wife was suddenly ambushed by Libria's forces, with him being on the defensive until his own colleagues revealed to him that she committed a sense offense. Such a violation was grounds for execution, and surely he must have felt something having his wife taken away from him. By morning, Preston does his usual morning routine, but somehow drops his vial of Prosium on the floor, alerting Robbie to have him replace it back at Equilibrium headquarters. This is the first time Preston makes such a mistake, which starts to wean him off the psychotic neutralizer, making him prone to feelings. At work, Brandt picks him up for the day's mission. There is a sense offender by the name of Mary to be arrested. At her house, they discover a stash of forbidden items. Mary grabs a gun to shoot at Preston, and Brandt swings in to defend him, but Preston prevents him from shooting her. He says they need her to tell them who the sources are before executing her. During her interrogation, Preston asks her, but she replies with another question, asking what his purpose for living is. Preston rolls out the programmed response they've all been taught to say, which is to serve Libria and see the continuation of human existence. Days later, as Preston wakes up, he removes the coverings over his window to see the rising sun. The beauty of this scene affects him greatly. However, his Libria senses kick in and he rushes to get a dose of Prosium to wipe out his sin. He changes his mind about taking the drug and disposes of more of it on his way to work. His behavior begins to change, and this is seen in their next assignment when they raid a group of rebels. As Brandt shoots one of them, Preston catches him and watches the life ebb out of him. This again affects him deeply. After the raid and massacre, Preston finds a room full of forbidden items and plays a piece of music by Beethoven. His emotions are deeply stirred, and he ends up crying. As the team of enforcers burns up the forbidden items, Brandt sees a nursery rhyme with Preston and demands to know why he didn't turn it in. Preston repeats the lies of his former partner, saying he wanted to turn it in for himself. They're interrupted by some soldiers who tell them that there are dogs in the compound. Brandt wastes no time in telling the soldiers to execute all of them. Preston tries to stop this but has no reasonable excuse. He watches in pain as the dogs are executed.
This is the height of depravity. How does a society seek to eliminate emotions but not even consider the fact that brutal, senseless executions are still expressions of emotions? This is hypocrisy at its peak.
One of the puppies runs up to Preston and he picks it up. Since he cannot give any reason to keep it, he hands it back to them for execution. However, he stops them again and takes the dog from them. He tells them that the dog has to be tested for diseases. Back at the headquarters, Preston asks DuPont why all offenders are instantly executed. He asks about the possibility of interrogation. DuPont, however, tells him that this is the direct instruction of the head of the Libria state. It must be followed irrespective of the opposing opinions of others. Preston seeks to release the dog he rescued earlier when some enforcers accost him. When they identify him, they apologize and want to let him go. Unfortunately, the dog in his trunk begins to yelp, and when they see it, they seek to arrest Preston. However, they are no match for Preston as he takes them all out. The next day, as Preston practices with his sword, Brandt joins him to spar without any invitation. He tells Preston about the next raid coming up soon. From his body language, it is obvious that he suspects Preston may no longer be who he was. However, only time will reveal anything. During the raid, Preston sees the rebels, but instead of eliminating them, he saves them and helps them on their escape. When some other officers arrive, he attacks them, leaving the rebels surprised. After fighting the soldiers, he discovers that the rebels are nowhere to be found. It turns out that Brandt had rounded them up and wants Preston to execute them. Preston makes up some excuse and doesn't pull the trigger. He has to watch in horror as the rebels are gunned down.
Preston visits the morgue where he seeks forgiveness from Partridge, his former partner. After finding a parcel of his with a lot of pictures, he sees one that interests him. It has the word freedom written on it. He takes the picture to Mary and asks her about it, but she denies any involvement with the clerics. This is until he shows her a picture of Partridge and her. It turns out that she was romantically involved with Partridge. Preston's further investigation leads him to a man, Jurgen, who leads a faction of the rebels. In the course of his interactions with Jurgen, he is made to undergo a polygraph test, which reveals that he has some emotional feelings towards Mary.
When Preston asks what he can do to help the resistance, Jurgen tells him to take the life of the supreme leader of Libria, Father. The contradiction between the figure referred to as Father and a real father could not be further from the truth. The image of a father should create feelings of comfort, safety, security, and love, not fear, intimidation, and terror.
Shortly after Preston's visit, he's arrested and taken to DuPont. The news seems to have gotten to him about Preston's new behavior. However, Preston explains to DuPont that all he's been doing has been trying to infiltrate the network of the resistance. The next few days reveal that Preston stops taking his dose of prosium and continues to meet with Jurgen. He tells Jurgen that taking out Father would be almost impossible as no one has seen or interacted with him in a long time. Jurgen tells him to use his years of training to find and take out the Father. He further tells him that on their part, they would disrupt the supply of prosium by burning up the labs where they are made. As Jurgen insists that he eliminates Father, Preston agrees. Jurgen warns him not to visit Mary anymore as his emotions may get the better of him. On the day of Mary's execution by burning, Preston cannot hold himself back and runs to the execution ground to stop it. Unfortunately, it's too late, as the machines have already been turned on. As he watches her execution, he breaks down and weeps in the street outside. Brandt, who had always been suspicious, comes with some soldiers and they arrest him. As they drag him before DuPont, Brandt tells him that Preston has a relationship with Mary and was also responsible for eliminating some of their soldiers. However, Preston speaks up by saying that he has been able to identify a traitor amongst them who works for the resistance. He goes ahead to say that the traitor is Brandt. Although Brandt tries to deny this, a check done on him reveals that Preston has swapped his gun when he asked him to execute the members of the resistance a while back. This makes Brandt the prime suspect in the murder of the soldiers. As they take Brandt away for judgment, DuPont tells Preston that his house will still need to be searched as standard procedure requires it. Preston, however, expresses his disappointment at having not met Father after all his contribution to bringing down the rebels' network. DuPont reminds him that Father doesn't readily grant anyone an audience. After the beating, Preston rushes home to get rid of the prosium bottles he has been hiding, but discovers to his shock that the vials are no longer where he's been hiding them. Fortunately, it's his son who hid them. It turns out that he and his sister had stopped taking the drug after the mother was executed. One day after meeting the resistance, they make up a plan to surrender to the Libria army. This is to make Preston gain access to the Father. After the call is made, the resistance leaders are arrested and Preston is prepared to meet the Father. On the day of the meeting, his weapon is taken from him, but he is told that he needs to take another test. What kind of father needs so many tests and protocols to meet his kids? None other than a phony. In the course of the meeting, Brandt, who is supposed to have been executed, shows up to the shock of Preston. It is revealed that Father had actually died a long time ago and DuPont had been acting as him. He had been suspicious of Preston and used him to infiltrate the resistance. What do they call that in chess again? Checkmate. Preston, who is a trained fighter, produces his gun from his sleeve and takes out all of the guards. He goes to DuPont, but has to defeat Brandt in a sword fight. As he disarms DuPont, who wants to shoot at him, he points his gun at him. DuPont pleads for his life and tells him that he also has emotions. He then asks if Preston would be able to deal with the guilt of his murder. "Not today, DuPont. I am not failing for this," Preston must say in his mind as he pulls the trigger, ending the life of the evil leader. Preston proceeds to destroy the systems responsible for transmitting Father's messages across the city. As the movie ends, the rebels begin to blow up the labs where prosium is made, signifying the end of tyrannical leadership.
This action movie packs a punch and tells a deep story if looked at carefully. It shows the power that is left to so many of the world's leaders to wield over their subjects, whether it's for good or evil. It also shows that change can begin with one man who insists upon it. Armies can fall, Empires can bow, and evil will be overcome if a man steps out of the shadows with the courage and boldness he needs in his heart. This movie is definitely a great watch, and it will be worth your time. Please subscribe to our channel to be notified when we upload, and also don't forget to suggest movies that you want us to recap in the future in the comments down below.